discipline. Et je passe tout de suite la parole à Wolfgang Munchau, qui est directeur d'Euro-Intelligence et éditeur associé du Financial Times. Merci, Wolfgang.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. The reason to invite a journalist to a panel is usually to have someone act as the agent provocateur. It's a role I'm very happy to accept today. And in fact, when it comes to the question of policy coordination, economic policy coordination, I come to a very similar conclusion than Robert Blackwell did in the previous session. The response to the crisis was appalling, as he said. I agree, and let me, in my short introduction, explain why I think it's and decompose it, the statement. First of all, global policy coordination is an ad hoc process. This is a situation where governments, in the form of the heads of government, heads of state, meet and come to an agreement. And it has had some modest successes in the past. And it is usually successful when we've been confronted with singular crises. You know, dollar crisis in the 1980s, we had the Louvre Plaza Accords, definitely positive. And even in the immediate aftermath of the Lehman debacle, you know, governments actually came together and made some important decisions. For example, the decision to guarantee bank lending, to guarantee deposits, the decision to have, at least in principle, an agreement that we need to stimulate our economies. These are positive things, and that probably prevented what could have been a much worse crisis back in October, November last year. It was a bad crisis. We had the fastest fall in global trade, even faster than in the early days of the Great Depression. So we should not, even though we are through the worst now, we should not minimize the severity of that crisis. But ad hoc coordination, as we have it, is not good after crisis. And there are a number of reasons for that. And especially not after such a profound crisis. And the fundamental reason is that we don't actually understand this crisis very well. We think we do understand this crisis, but our understanding of this crisis is still evolving. If you go back to the 1930s, during the Great Depression, people at the time had no understanding of why they were in the crisis. There were all sorts of very strange theories. In Europe and Germany in particular, people thought it was a crisis caused by cartel building, which obviously later turned out to be a very mistaken analysis. It was, you know, through Fisher's debt deflation theory, the world gained a partial understanding of the crisis. It was people like Keynes, later on many academics until Ben Bernanke found, you know, research into the crisis, and our understanding of the Great Depression is much more complete today than it was then. Now it won't take 60 years or 70 years until we understand this crisis, but the idea that this crisis was caused by, you know, bankers behaving badly or some, you know, regulatory faults in the financial system, which was sort of the consensus after the 2007 problems in the money market. Now we know now that is probably a too simplistic explanation of the crisis, and that there is probably some interchange between macroeconomic factors and microeconomic factors. And in terms of you know, the question of how finance and economics interact, macroeconomics has no great theories, except perhaps Hyman Minsky, who came up with a theory in the 1980s, which was then not considered mainstream, but which has some very disturbing implications on both on governance, global governance, and on the policy actions we need to take. Minsky postulated that the crises of the kind of which we have experienced are logical consequences of a financial sector that is too large, and of a system that favors investment spending as the engine of growth. That combination would invariably produce economic instability. Now, I'm not saying that Minsky is right. It's the only sort of theory we have at the moment, but we should at least understand that there are theories that still have to be developed, understanding that are still to be developed, and that a global coordination that focuses on, you know, regulating bankers' pay, which was sort of the big agreement in the last G20, certainly does not address the deep issues of this crisis. Now, a second reason why the process is not working well is the fact that countries have national vetoes, and when you have a system where you have national vetoes, and that, I understand you cannot immediately move towards a sort of majority voting systems, but then you get situations where countries with the large financial sectors, specifically the United States, but also the UK, block progress because they feel that the agreement is not in their national interest. For example, there is now a reasonable consensus among the academic community that the too large to fail issue of banks is certainly something we need to address, but it is something that we didn't address because obviously that might hurt some of the financial centers, and that's why some of the larger economies are foot dragging on this issue. So